What is your thing, then?
Complex female characters?
So, a month ago I uploaded my first video essay about everyone's favorite and not at all controversial Star Wars character Rey, and my comments were flooded with men saying that they couldn't express any dislike towards the character without being called misogynistic, and even women who were blamed to have internalized misogyny, because God knows in today's political climate criticizing a fictional female for being a bad character is equivalent to volunteering to test out effectiveness of guillotine. Because for centuries feminist women fought against patriarchal schemes, sexism, for emancipation, to earn their right to vote, work, be independent, and have the right for freedom of speech. Therefore, I'm going to use that same freedom of speech in order to defend my case against modern portrayal of feminism and feminists in today's media. So, straight to the guillotine we go. Everyone knows that Hollywood's main purpose has always been to make money and sell their product to the viewers. In order to do so, industry had to always shift their focus and area of investment to modern trends and what was currently selling on the market the most. That's the reason we see so many shifts in genres and film tropes over the decades. In the early 20th century there was a lot of musicals, but as the people's interest in them died down, we saw the rise of new set of preferences in media, like sci-fi movies, gangster movies, etc. In the 21st century, and most prominently in 2010s, growth and strengthening of social media and the internet has created a new criteria and demand among viewers, which is wokeness and representation. But the difference between older Hollywood tropes and today's woke trends is that back then if someone made a bad, let's say a horror movie, no one would go out of their way to defend the film or its characters just because it belonged to their preferred genre. Both critics and audiences would be able to identify a bad movie as a bad movie. But today, now that the media is juggling with political themes that have been historically more personal and touchy to people, now there are always some woke Twitter acclaimed activists that are gonna defend any product of any quality that is even a tiny bit closely related to their subject of interest. So we see more and more studios and films attaching this saint-like, representation-oriented, and politically aware role to get millions of advocates defending their shitty movies and characters just because they care about representation. And it works. Kinda. The political correctness fools generally stupid general audience into thinking that the movie and its substance is somehow untouchable. Critics feel obliged to be nice, to not seem sexist, racist, or whatever holy subject the unbothered writers try to squeeze in. And the pseudo-activists have a feast, and those who dare to touch upon the shittiness of the given product, well, guillotine. Don't get me wrong though, I have nothing against wokeness in media. As long as the outcome is something of a notable quality and the set piece of media has a good influence on the society. But today's studios are mostly abusing and milking the heck out of the concept of representation without bothering to actually, care about it. Woke concepts are almost everywhere, but the problem comes in where Hollywood does not only care about making money by applying the most relevant topics to their movies, Hollywood cares about making bucks the easiest and laziest of ways imaginable. So most of the media approaches historically the most delicate subjects to humanity with no enthusiasm, since their interest in the ideas do not come from the place of heart. They come from the place of obligation to please Twitter pseudo-activists in order to get them to watch their movies. At this point, political correctness has become sort of a shield and an excuse for the media to put minimal effort into the piece of creations they're putting out, because they're fully aware that as long as they scratch the sudden itch of the society to have soulless woke concepts, the movie is going to be received well regardless of its quality by at least some part of its consumers, by the hands of self-made, ignorant activists who have no actual competence in the subjects they're advocating for, and soulless, ignorant movie makers who do whatever their studios burden their overpriced backs with. The world has been introduced to a new, the most bankable, holy, and untouchable, a female lead. A strong female lead, to be exact. But before I talk about these unfortunate characters, I'm gonna talk about, of all the things, toxic masculinity. By definition, toxic masculinity is a concept that encourages people to go to insane lengths in order to distance themselves from any form of femininity, in fear of being perceived as weak or lesser than. Sounds familiar? If before male characters were burdened to constantly prove themselves as worthy alpha men and do their absolute best to not devalue their masculinity, today we see a huge and notable shift in the way films approach writing men. Even in the most action-oriented franchises, we start to see men in state of distress, immense vulnerability, weakness, hopelessness, slowly but effectively stripping them from all the toxic alpha male crap that was pushed towards young boys for centuries and begin to reveal them as normal, breathing, live-in humans with vulnerability that both boys and girls can relate to. But as we witnessed more and more male characters expressing vulnerability, weakness, and humanity, more stoic and wooden female leads became. It's as if as the idea of female leads became more prominent in Hollywood and more male leads emancipated, the toxic concepts that burdened men in the media started to infect a whole new gender. Therefore, while men started to get variety of types of characters like goofy ones, the heroic ones, the playboy types, women started to get strong female characters, whatever that means. In its early days, Hollywood was known for writing women as objects or very feminine, weak damsels in distress, but now the filmmakers started to try their hardest to distance themselves from that and write the exact opposite of it. Not weak women, not romantic interests, but strong women. And the profit-oriented filmmakers who didn't care about the topic in the first place use that as an excuse to write whatever they please. Therefore, more often than not, we end up with robots, like stoic, lifeless robots. This is the closest thing I can describe them as. The movie makers' need to make these characters as stoic and masculine as possible involuntarily creates a narrative that a woman who is anything but tough and dominating cannot be considered powerful, which sends a very unfortunate message to girls that girliness and femininity is a weakness of sorts.
Enough already with the strong women, please. Let's just be women. I'm gonna tell you how it feels to play a woman. The end. That's it. You don't get strong men unless you like physically strong men. You know what I mean?
Hollywood's ability to juggle women from 0 to 100 nauseates me, like either dehumanize them by completely objectifying them or dehumanize them by converting them to a software program to mimic a perfect human specimen. Either one of these two extremes, like, there's almost no in between. We rarely get to see women be vulnerable, lose, have a weak moment, express emotion, emote, because they need to be as alpha as possible in order to remain seen as strong as possible, which further proves my above-mentioned opinion that when it came to incorporating feminism, Hollywood didn't even try and just put on a wig on toxic masculinity and called it a day. So, we talked about how these girl bosses came to be, but what did they end up to be? What do they stand for? What is their substance? They're always right, they don't lose, they're girl bosses, they're girls who have power, they're strong, they kick ass, they kick men's ass, they don't fall under man, they don't kneel before man, they don't need a man. Because men make us weak, because all men are sexist and hide under our beds to scream at us in the middle of the night. Right? What I found very interesting was that more than one female-dominated movie had the same type of antagonistic relationship with the concept of men. Some, of course, are much more extreme with it than the others. In so many of these movies, we see the same plot of, at the beginning of the movie, introducing a female villain, only to later reveal that it was an evil man this whole time because women can do no wrong. This is such a one-brain-celled way of looking at things. Yes, historically it might seem like men were the root of all our problems, but in reality things are not as black and white as that. Men were and still are just as big of victims of societal pressures as women were. For centuries, young boys were groomed to fill the shoes of what the society and culture dictated what a real man should have been like, just the way women were pressured into the role of perfect housewives. In reality, there is no significant difference between the morality of these two genders. The reason why there was never a female Hitler is not because women were morally superior to men, but because historically women were never given an opportunity to wield that kind of power. And this is the problem not only with Hollywood's feminism, but with modern feminism in general, trying to morally devalue one gender to uplift the other. which is not sexist at all. One other thing that is worth noting is the lack of romantic interest in these movies. Of course, there's nothing deliberately wrong with the concept, but the reasoning behind it is something that actually bugs me. Because unless it's a Disney remake, in which case they really don't have another choice, it's painfully obvious that the writers go out of their way to completely deprive their strong female leads of any male partners in order to prove that these women are in no need of men, which is the worst way to go about it in my opinion, because to tell young kids that having a healthy relationship is not something they should desire or consider if they want to morph into strong adult women is kind of effed up. The lack of representation of healthy relationships in these movies unintentionally creates a narrative that a woman who has any type of a tie to a man or any other person cannot be considered independent or powerful. This is most upsetting when we realize that the closest thing we have to a definition of a strong woman, historically, are our own mothers and wives. Should it be that way? No, women should have far more opportunities to prove themselves outside of their families, but for now, this is today's reality. Therefore, imagine going up to a mother of 3 who works at a 9-to-5 job to help to support her family with a workaholic husband and saying that she's not a strong and independent woman because she tied herself to God forbid, a man and is devoted to raising her children. Or can you imagine going up to your own mother and saying that she sucks as a woman for having you or marrying your father? Because if most of these movies advocate for anything, is that a strong woman should not have a time nor wish to end up as anything other than a loner cat lady in a cool-looking suit. So, we're all going shopping, ladies. Over the past years, I've noticed a very interesting pattern, that every time a man creates a bad female-led movie, they are labeled as lazy and money-oriented, but every time a woman creates a bad female-led movie, they are defended and automatically victimized. Like, it's not their fault, it's just evil studios forcing them to make these bad choices in the movies because they're feminists, they care, they wouldn't do that. The thing is, these women are not being forced to do so, they're paid to do so. Then is there much of a difference between a woman who's ready to give up her whole belief system for a bag of cash and a self-proclaimed sexist dude? If most misogynistic men suck because they're ignorant and don't know better, then what can we say about a woman who does know better but regardless chooses to actively sabotage herself and her whole gender for her own profit? And it's tragic when you realize that thousands of competent and hardworking female filmmakers are being dragged down because of the above-mentioned few who sold every ounce of their professionalism to Mickey Mouse. And of course there are people like Elizabeth Banks. As a woman, nothing infuriates me more than other women who, instead of focusing on breaking gender rules by working hard for their own success, choose to actively victimize themselves and blame patriarchy and misogyny for every single obstacle they face in life.
A real plea is for men to have enough empathy to go see movies starring women. Because I've been asked to go see movies starring men my entire life, and happily have done so. And I don't know why men don't return that fucking favor.
So yeah, let's make less than a mediocre movie with lazy writing and even worse characters, then go around and insult 50% of the population, and then expect them to be willing to give us their money, and when they don't do so, get offended and insult them even further because our movie doesn't make profit, because men are sexist, and not at all because we went out of our way to bully half of humanity. But female empowerment, I guess. One of the cases of this tone-deaf activism that infuriated me a lot was in 2017's Beauty and the Beast. Because of our Lord and Savior, feminist Queen Emma Watson's heavy input on the movie's creative choices, they completely tore off character's most defining and iconic symbol, her yellow dress, and left her in this undergarment, sacrificing both movies and character's legacy, because if something downgrades a woman's strength is a fluffy dress, that is too fluffy. Because this belt is so much more empowering than this one. Oh yeah, centuries ago as children we were told that we couldn't wear pants and be considered women because of patriarchy. Now today's kids are being told that they can't want to wear fluffy dresses and be considered strong because a privileged feminist princess willed so. Don't believe me? Ask the dishes. Emma Watson.
Push her and mold her into a more acceptable version of herself. I think that happens a lot with women and a lot with young girls, where it's like, oh, that's nice, but why don't we just kind of push you this way a little bit? Let's cultivate that area or that sort of thing that you're good at, and let's just kind of like push that side a little bit.
We're not gonna have peace, guys. It's too early. Let's try next century, perhaps. In my opinion, one of the best and most recent examples of getting a female character right is in WandaVision. I might not be the biggest fan of the show, but I cannot be more impressed and glad about what they did with Wanda's character in the series. Writers don't shy away from making her too bad or too mad. Throughout the episodes, we see her trauma, vulnerability, anger, grief, longing for affection, love, and relationships. We see her be human. But none of these things strip away from her strength as a character, because as an audience, we understand very well that her actions are caused by the state of intense grief, vulnerability, and denial. We understand that because we know the feeling, we relate to it. That is exactly how you write a good character with all of its complexities. The second case of Hollywood getting a female lead right is Wonder Woman. I think this movie is probably the only case that doesn't completely butcher the essence of feminism. This movie does not follow the men bad and women good narrative. They even dare to give Diana a romantic relationship, which helps movie to be much more dynamic and enjoyable. Neither Diana nor Steve are in need of each other, and they're portrayed as equals. But what I appreciate the most about this movie is that it doesn't get scared to have a good supporting male characters to back Diana's side. We see women and men working together instead of against each other, or a woman spending the entirety of the movie saving their poor asses. Diana is strong but very vulnerable. She's independent but not isolated. She's smart but also very much gullible and naive. On that note, 1984 is a great example of a movie that has a great potential, but gets too caught up in the easy way out and uninspired empowerment messaging. So what's the solution here? This is a stupid question because the answer is simple. Write well-written characters instead of the politically motivated ones. It's not that hard. That's the reason why I'll always relate to Peter Parker or Tony Stark more than I'll ever be able to relate to Captain Marvel or the movie version of Mulan or Rey. Don't write strong women, write humans. In these movies, the strength of these characters feed off of their humanity, leaving only as soulless, empty vessels that only exist to push the political agenda. But we need to realize that moments of weakness and vulnerability do not take away from a person's strength. They make them relatable and human.
I remember watching different movies, and immediately when you see the woman, when she's strong, then that means she's tough, she's distant, she's cold, she's like, And how do you tell a story about a woman that is super strong and make everyone feel like they can relate to her story? And I think that the fact that we showed it in the movie, that you can be vulnerable and you can be innocent in a way and truthful and loving, like you can have it all.